So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay and to a map that has not been seen yet, and that's part of the reason why it's going to get bumped up the order a little bit. It's going to be put in as soon as I can make that possible, to be honest with you, not only because I was a part of this battle, but also because this is Gondolin, and it is a map that was made, I believe, by Captain Gervais, so he's done a very good job on it as well, as you can see. So it's more or less one of those classic settlements where there are several layers, sort of the wedding cake type layout, as I often like to refer to it as. And you can see that it has the first ring with the bridges leading across from the outer fields, the second layer here around this tower, and then finally up and around to the final sort of position that the defenders can take up around the Fountain of the King and his tower. I don't know whether a custom model will be made for this later. I don't think it will. I think it's just here for flavour, to be honest with you. But yes, definitely a very pretty looking settlement, especially with all of the elven buildings and architecture. There's a lot going on here as well. There's a lot of little areas that the defenders can take up, which is always a good thing in a siege. Gives the siege a little bit of depth rather than it just being a series of choke points. So I think Gervais has done a really, really good job on this map, honestly, and it's stuff like this that really makes me believe that Silmarillion will be a terrific final product when eventually it does get there, but of course we're a long way off from that yet. A campaign does take a while to develop, and they're still in the very early stages of that, and all of the factions have not yet been added, including the namesake of this city. Gondolin are not in the game as of yet, so at some stage I'm sure we will be returning to this grand city once again to see Gondolin themselves take to the defence, but for now they will be stood in for by arguably the two scariest factions in the game at the moment, Fingolfin and Finarfin, the houses of both. I, however, am on the attack today with the forces of evil and darkness, which will be spearheaded by J-Monster over here, who's playing as the Realm of Angband. This battle was actually shown on his stream, so some of you may have already seen it before, but it was a very nice battle, and I'm very glad that I'm able to show it. I was wondering if the map was going to be changed and if it was off limits, but it's not, and so here it is. He's playing as the one and only Angband army today, and of all the evil factions in the game at the moment, Angband are the most well suited to being on the attack during a siege, because they're by far the most heavily armoured of the three evil factions that are in the game at the moment. Ironshod units are a very good example of that. He's gone for the armour upgrade on them as well, so Ironshod Legionnaires and Ironshod Halberdiers. So the Ironshods by no means are going to be able to outperform higher tier Elven units, and particularly seeing as this is a 4v2, it gives you some idea as to the level of quality that the defenders are going to have at their disposal today. They're going to have all of their best units, and they're going to have them in greater numbers than they normally would. So the Ironshods are not going to win in outright quality terms, however, they're really good at taking punishment at range, or at least they're very efficient at taking punishment at range, the Legionnaires especially, with the armour upgrade. But also, they're not lacking in terms of numbers either. In terms of having a nice, solid unit of relatively cheap line infantry, Angband definitely are well catered for when it comes to attacking a settlement. And the Halberdiers, of course, they can be shot up because of their lack of a shield. The armour upgrade will help them, but again, seeing as we're up against some very high quality defenders today, it obviously informs what sort of archers we're going to be going up against, so they really don't want to be hit by them if they can help it. Also, because we're going up against Finarfin, Halberdiers, they're very nice for their AP and their phalanx, and most factions only have one phalanx unit, if at all. But against the likes of Finarfin's pikemen, they will find themselves outranged. They could still be very useful, however, if they can avoid being engaged by the bridge wards, but we shall see if that happens later on. We've got some Iron Crown units as well, the sort of upper echelon of Angband's main line. The Guardians of the Iron Crown, very heavily armoured and heavily shielded line infantry that wield a mace. The armour piercing will be useful to a certain extent against both Fingolfin and Finarfin, so it's good that they are here. Once again though, even these units, who are definitely stronger than the Ironshods in front of them, won't be able to fully outmuscle the upper tier of Elven units they're going to be fighting for the most part. Standard Elven units, yes, but the higher crust of the Elven society that they're going to be facing today, they're not going to be able to outright beat them, but the armour piercing will of course help, and ultimately it will be a numbers game for us because we greatly outnumber the enemy. There's also some Ironshod Arbalists. They will be useful if they get into position. The punch that crossbows offer will be really, really useful for breaking up frontline formations. Stuff like the bridge wars will want to avoid the Arbalists at all cost. It just depends on how J-Monster is able to utilise them, because if the defenders play their cards right, we shouldn't be getting easy shots with the crossbows, but potentially they could be one of our best tools for dealing with the front lines of Finarfin and Fingolfin. Spearguard of the Iron Crown are the spear variant of the Macemen we just saw. Obviously that makes them more defensive, they can get into shield walls, so they can last longer certainly, but they don't have really anywhere near the same sort of killing power, especially against armoured units, that the Guardians have. Got some upgraded Ironshod Reavers over here as well, so they are the slightly more offensive variant of the Legionnaires we've already seen because they wield a one-handed axe rather than a rusty one-handed sabre. Now this, more or less, they will offer the same sort of thing in a battle like this. It just allows you to not go into the red limit on one or the other. So again, very much a numbers game. They're going to be able to withstand a bit of punishment at range because of the upgraded armour and the fact they wield a shield. But ultimately they're not going to be able to outright defeat Elven units in melee. But the additional bit of damage that those axes offer may very well be very useful indeed. More Ironshod Reavers. There are some units in the trees over here. More Reavers, and there's some hay bales. That's not part of the army. We have the mighty Bulldogs with their riveted sort of severed heads onto their back. I don't know if you can see, it doesn't actually show up on the graphic, but these stakes with heads are actually sort of riveted into their flesh, which is rather grisly. There's a lot of rather grisly lore that goes along with the upper tier of the evil units, certainly. The Bulldogs, they are unbreakable. They greatly boost the morale of nearby units as well. They're really, really good in a grindy fight, to be honest with you, because they take a real beating, a lot of damage they can take, and of course they boost the effectiveness of the units around them. This is one of the units in melee that the elves should be scared of. They do have units which can go toe to toe with them, but Angband's upper tier units, they've got some really scary stuff, and the Bulldogs are the most mundane looking of them, but don't let that fool you. They can be incredibly difficult to get rid of, and they can do a lot of damage in the interim when they're alive. We have the Valoralkar, the Balrogs, of course. This is what Angband really are all about, having these huge monstrous juggernauts that they can wade into battle with. Obviously a lot of damage that they can deal as well. They are classed as elephants now, so they have an area of effect attack, as well as having sort of even more mass really to push through the lines rather than being just straight up infantry. This does, however, open them up to anti-elephant damage, so stuff like pikes are actually useful against them now. So forget what you know about trolls, pikemen will actually be good against stuff like the Valoralkar now. So there is actually a mechanical reason why you would want to bring the trolls over the Valoralkar now, so they do offer different strengths and weaknesses. In this case though, because of the narrow confines of some of the streets, those area of effect attacks could be absolutely brutal as long as they avoid the anti-elephant damage. And finally, the Uroloki, obviously with their fiery breath, which deals a lot of damage, especially against lightly armoured targets. They could be really useful in those choke points as well. We couldn't bring artillery as the attackers, so there's going to be no artillery for us, but to be honest with you, the Uroloki function as a sort of makeshift artillery piece. They don't do as much damage at range as artillery do, but when all is said and done, they also make for a pretty decent organic battering ram as well. Moving on to my army, I'm playing as the Easterlings, probably the most fragile of all of the attacking factions, to be honest with you, for the most part. Their mid-tier is quite sturdy, but they can't fall back on numbers to absorb damage like Toll and Gaurhoth can, and they aren't as sturdy all-round as Angband can, but I can also offer quite a lot in the way of supporting tools. So you can see I've got a couple of units of Eastron horsemen. The Easterlings don't have any foot archers, so they're entirely reliant on cavalry archers to do their sort of long-range damage, as it were, which is not ideal, but I brought them anyway because it offers me something that I can use to get around the battlefield quickly, because Gondolin is quite large, but also it means that I can support my allies as well. And to be fair as well, once they're out of ammunition, they do offer me a bit of a rapid response to get across the map quickly. They won't be very good at doing damage with their melee capabilities, of course, but it's better than having nothing, and ultimately they're very cheap. You can bring 3, but I only brought the 2 because I also brought a unit of the Salamandrine Guard, and there is definitely method behind spending a little bit more on these horse archers because they are excellent anti-cavalry hunters. Not only do their flaming arrows cause units that they hit to become shaken immediately, albeit in order to outright rout a unit that has the effect of, you have to be winning the battle anyway, so effectively standard fire arrows, but they are really, really good at dealing with other cavalry units, and I was kind of expecting one cavalry unit in particular that I was bringing the Salamanders to try and counteract, and these 2 units of Eastrons can also back them up as well, and that's why I was sending them off with J-Monster to try and help screen, and a couple of units that I'm sending to help them as well, some Eastron Marauders, so a obviously unarmoured throwing axe unit, which obviously can be very useful for their base damage, sending them up to try and give Angband a bit of support, but also the only unit of armour-piercing infantry I really have outside of my phalanx unit, the Sons of Ulfang. The other Falx units that the Easterlings have available to them are not armour-piercing. The Sons of Ulfang, however, the highest tier of them are. They're not multiple HP, however, they occupy that spot just below the bodyguard units. They're a high tier unit, but they're not bodyguard tier. But the AP I thought could be useful to send along with Angband to give them a little bit of extra punch alongside the likes of the Bulldogs, at least that was my thinking initially. Then over here we have a couple of ranks of my units, so I've got 3 units of the Warband of Lothlin. This is my low tier infantry unit. They're pretty much the closest thing I have to fodder, but I wouldn't really put them on the same level as like the thralls that Angband have, or the warband that the Gaurhoth players will have, because they are a little bit sturdier. They're a little bit more expensive than them, but that big shield value that they have does really help them. You're not going to really want to shoot into the warband anyway, but if you do, they're going to be even more well prepared to deal with the damage coming their way. I've got a single unit of Wardens of Lothlin. The Lothlin units in general are the tankiest part of the Easterling roster by far. You know, that is the core with which you build around, and in a siege they're definitely the way to go, I think, because they do offer the ability to withstand much more punishment than the other Easterling units will. Obviously the shirtless marauders you can see over there in the background, I've got more of them over here, a couple of units that are going to go right up the middle. Naturally, you know, they are not going to take a lot of damage at all. Nor are the Ravagers of Heimring. This is the entry-level Falx units. They don't have armor piercing. They do, like a lot of shock units in Silmarillion though, do have a very potent charge bonus, and they do actually have a nice anti-cavalry bonus as well. That's not going to be terribly applicable in a battle like this, but it is neat to know the fact that if you do get bogged down with your cavalry in Easterling ranks, chances are you're going to take an enormous amount of damage. We've got a couple of units of the Clan Guard of Lothlin as well, so the sword variant of the spear unit in front. They will of course be better in a pit fight at dealing damage slightly, but they don't have access to the formations that the Spears of Lothlin, Wardens of Lothlin have. I've also got a couple of units of Halberdiers of Lothlin, so very much the same thing as the Angband Halberdiers, only higher tier actually. They are more expensive, and obviously it follows that they are, you know, better overall. But you do pay that extra as well, but definitely worthwhile in a situation like this. Again, the same sort of weaknesses against stuff like the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. Ravagers of Heimring, so another unit of them, and finally I have a unit of my Chieftain's Honour Guard, which is where my general's going to be. Similar sort of thing to the Bulldogs, only they do less damage overall, I would say. They're very, very tanky, the Chieftain's Honour Guard, but they're not quite as scary to face in battle as the Bulldogs are. And then, the first of two Gaurhoth players, we have Ralmek, who is a newer player, so good to see him around. He's got some Scarahai Trappers, so once again another throwing axe unit. Actually no, this is the Javelin unit, isn't it? It's the Long Fangs that are the throwing axe unit, and he does have a lot of them, so a lot of throwing projectiles for Gaurhoth, so we're well covered for that. Definitely going up the middle myself, and Ralmek doing that. He's got some Hishtbuk Howlers, locked morale units. This is going to be really, really useful for us as well, because I thought at the start of this battle we'd be taking a lot of punishment early on, and stuff like the Howlers obviously won't break, so at the very least we'll be able to maintain an assault for longer, even if we start to get some elements of our army routing. The Gijak Scaraz, so much in the same way as my Clan Lothlin units and J Monster's Iron Crown units, this is the sort of sturdier unit in the Gaurhoth roster. The Gijak Scaraz, they're still not quite as tanky as stuff like the Iron Crown, but it's better than having nothing, and they're significantly tankier than a lot of the other lighter units that Gaurhoth have available to them. He's got the Wolf Guard as well, so pretty much the same story as the Guardians of the Iron Crown. They're a heavier infantry unit that wield a mace, so yet more armour piercing. And even more armour piercing from the Scarahai Blood Drinkers. Once again, high charge, and they are armour piercing in comparison to my Heimring Ravagers. Again though, they are very, very weak to stuff like missile fire, so when they are committed will really make all the difference, I think. And I think that's just about it. I think he's got some Ash Priests. No, he doesn't. His general is actually Sauron himself, the Lord of War. So you can see the general model is just going to be sort of shadowing him around. But he does have Sauron, so again, much in the same way as the Balrogs. Individually he's probably, well, he is stronger actually than the Balrogs individually, but the same weaknesses and strengths pretty much apply. He is technically an elephant in the game files. And finally for the attackers, we have another Gaurhoth force commanded by Lord Belagost. He's got some Hishtbuk Howlers again. A good choice always really, because of their locked morale, even if they don't do tons of damage. The Blood Drinkers can actually do a lot of damage, but again, situation is everything, and I would imagine the defenders will want to target them down pretty quickly. Gijak Scaraz units, again, the Chosen, good for holding the line, and the Wolf Guard, bit of extra damage on those maces. He has got the Ash Priests, so obviously a brutal projectile, and that's where his general's going to be as well, which is good. Relentless in melee, so they can't be staggered, huge armor piercing damage, 3 hit points, a truly terrifying unit in the middle of all of these orcs. Scarahai Trappers and Longfangs, and he too has Sauron. So once again we're seeing Sauron in stereo today. One of them is a clone. I'll leave it up to you to decide which one that is. And finally we do have some Hishtbuk Zagula Klab, so that is a unit of javelin cavalry essentially. They fire their little fiery javelins at the enemy, and it's good that he's brought this again, because I'm pretty sure that we were expecting some cavalry on the defence. Not a load, but some. And now let's have a look at the defenders, starting off with the House of Finarfin, commanded by Melkor. He's got some Archers of Talath-Dyrnin, a very standard unit certainly, but they're going to be able to out-skirmish most of what we have to offer, especially on this side, because of course Angband don't have the most in terms of ranged options, and my long-ranged option is a Horse Archer unit, which you never really want to get in an outright skirmish fight. But really they're just down here to deploy their stakes. Then I imagine they will retreat to the relative safety anyway of their second line. You can see here the Marksmen of Nargothrond. These are the split shots, truly terrifying really to try and tackle them. Not quite as devastating as a unit of Rangers, but they will still wreak havoc if we allow them to. And he's gone for 4 units of them. You would never really see 4 units of them in a single army like this unless you get given extra funds, which of course the 2 defenders will. So it's, if you like seeing 2 very high quality elven armies on the defence, then you come to the right place today. The Marksmen of Nargothrond here in force. A catapult, so they do have a bit of artillery, which in a position like this is very scary because they've got a nice area to aim at downhill over their men, so they're not going to get obstructed. Very, very nice for them. Some Swordsmen of Talath-Dyrnin, who have got a throwing projectile. It's not armour piercing, even though it is a javelin. The half-strength unit, rather confusingly, does have armour piercing. But still, the projectile's all well and good, but for the most part they will be here for their abilities as a good, solid unit of line infantry that has a bit of damage capabilities at range as well. The bridge wards are one of the big problems we're going to have to try and find a way of dealing with in this siege, because they're going to be here in numbers that we wouldn't normally see them in. But yeah, they are the strongest unit of pikes in the game, and in fact we're facing off against the 2 factions that have a monopoly on pikes. The bridge wards are by far the stronger of the 2, but Fingolfin can also contribute in that respect as well. Wardens of Nargothrond, they're an armour-piercing spear, so even all of these spear units that Nargothrond use to be very defensive, they do have a bit of a bitter edge to them, so to speak, and the armour-piercing will be really useful, especially, I have to say, against Angband, but also against the Lothlin units for myself and the Gijak Skaraz. It's really difficult to sort of wear your way through Finarfin from the front, and we don't have a choice. We have to tackle them from the front, because that's the nature of a siege, so that is what it is. Arqueni Mormagilwa, the Knights of the Black Sword, one of the only, if not the only, infantry unit in the Finarfin lineup that is outright aggressive really in its setup. But of course they're going to be committed to areas where they need a bit of extra damage, a bit of extra punch. I think they're the only sword bodyguard as well in the game, the only 2-handed sword bodyguard anyway. Very, very scary to tackle head on also. This is a unit I've been looking forward to seeing up close and personal with the settings up high. The Arqueni Findicano, the legendary company for the House of Fingolfin, a brutal unit of horse archers, which I believe their projectiles are anti-elephant, so that makes them a perfect, well, at least the way J Monster was talking makes me believe that's the case, and that makes them the perfect counter against Angband's monsters, against Tolin Gaurhoth's Sauron unit. I don't have any elephant class units as the Easterlings, so that's fine, and that's one of the reasons, this is the reason why I brought the Salamandrine Guard, and the Easteron Horse Archers will be flanking them, because I want to be able to sort of defend, particularly J Monster, from them, because stuff like the Balrogs we need to really be a bludgeon later on, so we can't afford the Findicano skirmishing them down, so that's why I brought my skirmishers as I did. Sartor Findarato are the other infantry bodyguard that Finarfin have, multiple HP, very heavily armoured spears. I don't think they're armour piercing like the Wardens of Nargothrond are, but obviously they are orders of magnitude tankier because of their second hit point. More Wardens of Nargothrond, more Swordsmen of Talath-Dyrnin, and more Bridge Wards. I think as we go into this side of the settlement, we've already seen the Findicano, but we will see more of the Fingolfin player. Indeed we will. Captain Gervais, the map maker himself. The Sentries of Hithlum are the other unit of pikes in the game at the moment. Significantly cheaper, and they're not as good as the Bridge Wards by any means, but just having a unit of pikes to plug up choke points like this is going to be really, really good for them. And obviously they do counteract elephant class units. They will be good against stuff like Sauron, against stuff like Balrogs. Now, because they are a lower end human unit, you can break them with enough pressure, but if you don't break them quickly with such units, you can find them having a bit of an extra bite. And they will be fighting alongside the line infantry, the Bladesmen of Bered Ithel, obviously the Swordsmen of Fingolfin. They're more aggressive than Finarfin, certainly, and their sword mastery alongside Finarfin's polearm mastery makes for a very, very deadly combination. Bladesmen of Bered Ithel, fantastic unit of line infantry, 2 units of the Sons of Húrin. This is the sort of thing that you will really not see all that often. Possibly my favourite unit in the game, to be honest with you, the Sons of Húrin. Their charge is absolutely monstrous. It can have the same sort of impact as a unit of regular cavalry with a perfect charge, so it gives you an idea of what you're up against. Really, really scary, massive armour-piercing damage as well. More Sentries of Hithlum, so a lot of human units, actually, a big human presence, and then we start to get into the Elven core. The Bladesman of Buried Ithel, once again, really good for holding the line. Sword and board unit. Marksman of Buried Ithel, so again the heavier archer for the elves. We have the Marines of Vinyamar. Obviously their javelins are armor piercing, so they're going to be able to do a lot of damage if they get into the right positions, which in a settlement like this they should certainly be able to. And then at the back we've got a couple of units of the Herdsmen of Hithlum. They don't have a lot of armour, certainly not in comparison to the heavy elven archers in front of them, but they do double as a nice two-handed axe unit in melee. So that's a little bit of extra AP. And finally, yes indeed, I knew they were here somewhere, the General's Bodyguard for Fingolfin today, the Irimo Arantar, who are of course a sword and board variant of the Bodyguard. They obviously have the Sons of Hurin to be more aggressive. These guys, however, are the tanks. Very, very difficult to wear down, with their sword mastery giving them a huge melee defense value. So, without further ado, let's begin. Just having a look over Gondolin itself. So it is a big settlement, and particularly for two players, obviously it would be a little bit difficult for them to hold the outer ring. I think in a 3v5, for example, they would hold the outer area. On this occasion, however, they're going to go for a little bit of a hybrid approach. So they're going to fall back over here, they're going to give a little bit of space, try and draw Angband into their catapult, and I think as well, yes, they are going to send, rather wisely, the mighty Arqueni Findakano over here. Hugely impressive unit indeed, which is of course going to lead to me immediately sending across my cavalry. This will mean that they can't sally out, they can't try and wear down stuff like the Balrogs, Easterling Horsemen, but particularly the Salamandrine Guard. If it were just one unit of horse archers, the Findakano would almost certainly win, but with my 3 units, that should be more than sufficient to deal with that. Bridge pathfinding being what it was, my units start marching this way, but eventually I have to sort of finagle it so we get over the bridge. So just that fact means we're going to be delayed a little bit getting over the bridge. But they are going to mount an outer defence over here. Fingolfin is going to take the front foot over on this side against Belagost's army of Gaurhoth. So we're not going to see the outer layer completely abandoned. They are going to hold on here on this. Technically speaking, I think looking downwards on the map is northwards. So this would mean that this is the west. So the western side of Gondolin is going to be the first to see battle as Belagost's Gaurhoth army makes its way forward. Good at dealing damage, Gaurhoth, however, a lot of their units are more lightweight, especially in comparison to Angband. That's a problem that both myself and both of the Gaurhoth players are going to have in this battle. A lot of our genuine damage dealers are going to be fairly vulnerable to the defensive positions that we're going to be having to go up against today. He does have some Hishbuk-Kraz hunters as well that revealed themselves a low tier arch to be sure, but well worth bringing to be honest with you, because just a low tier arch like this can lead to some good skirmish opportunities. The Hishbuk-Kraz over here as well should be able to get some good volleys off with their fiery sorceries. Going after especially something like the Sentries of Hithlum should be a good call, as the fiery projectiles do hit their marks, and a few of the elves guarding the pikemen in behind do fall. A few of the pikes will probably fall away as well, but a good start for us, because every unit they lose is going to be key here. This is, after all, a 4v2. So while we are horribly outmatched in terms of the overall quality of the forces we're going up against, all we need to do is wear them down, and eventually the manpower deficit will really hurt them. The Herdsmen of Hithlum shooting their limited ammo supply into the Hishbuk-Kraz, but it's a good target to go after because they are, after all, freely shooting their javelins in, but they could use all their projectiles here. Even so, having a unit of wargs sort of running amok within the city later is not really something you want anyway. Marksmen of Buried Ithel taking up position on these walls. Marines of Vinyamar thinking about throwing a javelin volley in, but holding off for the time being. Definitely a very nice unit to have at their disposal here. Meanwhile, what have we here? A wall. Arqueni Findakano maybe thinking about heading out, but it's not really worth their while at this point. They could try and maybe skirmish down the halberdiers, but their projectiles are a little bit too valuable to be doing that with, even if the halberdiers are one of J Monster's more prized assets. And of course, if they do move out too far, my horse archers will be well covered for dealing with them. The vast majority of my army making its way across the bridge already, the warband of Lothlin and the Ravagers of Heimring leading the way, so my cheaper units first, and then my Lothlin units, I'm sort of dragging them out across the bridge. Obviously, Ralmak is a newer player, bridges can be a little bit awkward, so he's going to take a little bit longer to get across, but ultimately the bulk of our armies will be heading across here sooner rather than later. And actually, we're about to see, yeah, this is something that I realised, a big misplay really from Captain Gervais, as he charges through his allies' own stakes and ends up skewering a lot of his Arqueni Findicano. So not a good start for him really, because they are very expensive, a very prized asset indeed, like I said. But they still have all their ammunition available to them, so it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely not the start he would have been hoping for. The melee engagement over here is well underway, as we can see the Scarahide Blood Drinkers charging in with the Hishbut-Krau's Howlers, and to be fair, the Pikes are lagging behind the front line a little bit, so the armour piercing will have a bit of an impact on the Bladesmen of Beredaethel, but neither of these two units are well armoured or shielded, so they make for an ideal target really for archers. The Herdsmen of Hithlum are just sort of waiting. You can see the Hishbut-Krau's Hunters are in position. Ejak Scaraz's Wolfguard going to come forward to offer a little bit more of a sturdiness to the front line here, but of course right on cue Captain Gervais is going to get his Marksman of Beredaethel into position to shoot along those lines. So it's going to be tough for Belagos, but not a bad start all things considered. Sort of start to wear them down. Marksmen of Nargothrond meanwhile are shooting into my blob as it moves forward. You can see even though the Warband of Lothland have got a decent shield value from the front, the quality of the projectiles we're dealing with here means they're getting ripped to shreds, and of course part of the problem with getting across these bridges, we're really like fish in a barrel here, and my Ravagers of Heimring are going to be even more weak to that sort of thing. Their armour values are not amazing and they are unshielded, so you can see the Nargothrond Marksmen immediately reaping a heavy toll on my army. Nothing too devastating though, like we have taken losses, but this is to be expected. In a 4v2, to prevent it being a runaway attacker victory, this is the sort of thing you have to sort of take on the chin. And I don't mind being the one to do that, because it means Tol and Gaurhoth will be able to come forward without such pressure on them. So it's definitely a game of give and take here. Meanwhile, having a look over here, you can see some Ejak Scaras chosen who are already horribly damaged, actually, presumably as a result of the Marines of Vinyamar shooting into them, because I doubt the archers would be able to accomplish all that on their own. Sauron is moving in as well. The Hishbut-Krau's Howlers are in there. Hunters, so more Tol and Gaurhoth units coming in. It'll be risky for Sauron to go through here from the front, because there are pikes, of course, and if Sauron gets caught on them, that anti-elephant damage will be nasty. Oof, that blood spray, though, and flanking fire causes the Scarahide Blood Drinkers to melt away. Bladesman of Beredaethel. Sauron is pushing his way through, so he will get through, and he will go into the Herdsmen of Hithlum by the looks of things, but they're already out of ammo, so they might not actually be the best target to go up against, and indeed he elects not to in the end, because those axes with their AP damage could be a big problem for them. Meanwhile over here, J-Monster is also being introduced to the pleasure of the company of the Marksmen of Nargothrond, just as I was from the front. And there goes the Catapult as well, so he too is taking some pretty heavy damage right from the start, probably heavier than mine actually, especially when you factor in the Catapult, and the Swordsmen of Talath Dirnin are going to be able to throw their projectiles in as well to the Iron Shot Reavers. Armour upgrade or no, it will help them withstand a lot of this punishment, but just through sheer volume of fire, it's going to be a real problem here. And you can actually see over here as well, I'm sending over my Ravagers of Heimring to try and help Belagos out. Now, this is risky because it does attract the attention of the archers within the second layer, including the Marksmen of Nargothrond. However, I took a look over here and I actually thought, I mean, he's doing okay on the front line, but if this carries on, essentially what can happen is Fingolfin can at their leisure commit more units in. Sauron is causing damage, definitely a problem for them on the front line, but ultimately he will fall if left to his own devices. So what I'm doing is sending across some units to try and attract some of their attention. It's not ideal because the Ravagers are quite fragile, but it's better than nothing. And it is having the desired effect because these Bladesmen of Beredaethel who on the front line would be a danger, but in particular the Sons of Húrin, they're being sort of siphoned off right now. And that should give Belagos a little bit more breathing room. More to the point, you can see the Uraloki from J-Monster is coming over here. So it's not just a case of us staying in our own individual choke points, we are helping each other out. Which is going to be key to our efforts going forward, because if this fight is made to be too uniform in nature, that will favour the highly organised ranks of Fingolfin and Finarfin. Meanwhile, Swordsmen of Talathdinin are being engaged as J-Monster rapidly moves to try and silence some of these archers. I think the Nargothrond marksmen, who are very damaging, but they don't have the most ammo. I think they're already out of ammo, actually. But the Ironshod Ravagers are coming in. Crossbow bolts are whistling overhead, so the assault over here is also well underway. Meanwhile, you can see over here, I've also sent a single unit of my Clan Guard of Lothlin over here as well, but this is a problem for me. I was really hoping that I would be able to engage them behind this building, but Captain Gervais knows what he's doing. Actually, no, I've got both my units of Clan Guard of Lothlin over here, so both my units of Swordsmen. Actually, no, I had 3 units of Swordsmen overall, didn't I? But regardless, between my Ravagers of Heimring and my Swordsmen, this is a decent little force, but if it's being shot from on high by the... what sort of archers are these? Archers of Talathdinin? I mean, they're a basic unit of archers, but it doesn't really matter. We've also got Herdsmen of Hithlum coming in, so there's a huge amount of AP on that front line, which is going to do a lot of damage to my Clan Guard. I'm getting shot in the side, which is going to do a lot of damage to my Ravagers. And there's also point-blank fire from the Marksmen of Barad-Eitel as well. But this is a lot of resources over here that are now being committed to stopping this flanking force. So this is the moment, now more than ever really, for Belagos to take advantage. And he is. This front line is looking a little bit thin on the ground. So this could be a good opportunity for Tol and Gaurhoth, and if that is the case, then essentially my poor Ravagers laying down their lives will be worth it. You can also see the Marksmen of Barad-Eitel are under direct fire from the Uraloki. There's a little bit of a green fire in behind them. And here they go again with another volley of them. That was nice, ripping right through the ranks. They're decently armoured, the Marksmen of Barad-Eitel, so it won't rip through them in the way that it would a Green Elf firing line. But still, good damage done. Marines of Vinyamar over here. Marksmen of Barad-Eitel, I think they're coming back because they realise that if Tol and Gaurhoth commit now with all they have, they can buckle this line. But you can see how quickly my Ravagers have melted. A combination of the Archer Fire and the Sons of Húrin have done massive damage. My Lothlin units are hanging on for longer, which is gratifying, but ultimately that flanking is going to be a failure. But if Belagos can pull through, then it will be worth the committal anyway. I've got my Easterlings Horsemen over here because it's becoming immediately apparent now that the Arqueni Findicano, they're just going to be used like more of a standard archer throughout this game. So I'm going to send my Easterlings Horsemen forward to assist in J-Monster's efforts to move through here. Like I said, doesn't really matter what I'm targeting with my Easterlings Horsemen because their projectiles are of relatively low quality. And it's a numbers game for us. If we can wear them down enough, ultimately they won't have the numbers to withstand us. You can see the Bulldogs are on the front line as well, so they're going to keep these units in melee for longer. They're getting a lot of support from the crossbowmen and from my Easterlings Horsemen as well, so I mean, it is a problem on the front line. Like, the only thing that's really stopping us from claiming victory on this front line is the fact we don't have a lot of infantry over here, but J-Monster is going to rectify that problem with more Reavers, because that's a lot of missiles coming their way, and against the unshielded marksman, that could definitely have the desired effect. We haven't really started the assault over here yet, because this choke point of all of them is the most unappealing to charge through. It's a very small choke point, and they've got the perfect position for the marksman of Nargothrond. So what we're going to do instead, we're going to start off with Ralmek doing so with his Scarahai Longfangs. He's going to throw his projectiles in here, soften the enemy up, so to speak. Some good damage here on the Swordsmen of Talathdinin. The opportunity as well exists to do some damage to the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, which of course will be the anchor to any line, and I believe I will do the same as well. They're not on the front line yet. I've got my warband to sort of stop any sort of counter assault, and my wardens as well. But as soon as Ralmek is done, which he is already because the Longfangs don't have a lot of ammunition, he will charge in. I will also charge in some support with my lower tier units and a unit of my Lothlin wardens. But I will also do the same after his ammunition is expended with my Easterlings Marauders. So again, none of these axe throwers are particularly high quality, but over time this will have an impact. But those shields of the Swordsmen of Talathdinin are definitely having the desired effect. But over here you can see my flanking force didn't really fare all that well. Really badly actually. When you have a look at the corpses on the ground, there are barely any elven corpses. I mean, there is a thin line of blue capes that you can see, but for the most part the Sons of Húrin absolutely demolished my position. There's 50 of them, so they did take some losses, but really very little, and it goes to show how bad that engagement really was for me. But all is not lost, because it has left this position over here a little bit undermanned, and as a result both J-Monster with his Uraloki and, yeah, here we go, I think the Arqueni Findicano's arrows are AP. I don't know what the green trail signifies, but I don't know if that is anti-elephant damage, but the Uroloki are going to really struggle here. The Arqueni Findicano are going to be able to kill things off. I'm pretty sure Sauron died at some stage in here as a result of all of the AP and all of the pikes that Fingolfin had here. But ultimately, pulling off a lot of resources to deal with me has given Balagos the opportunity to push forward. He has got a lot of numbers in here now. The Uroloki have ultimately fallen, but there are Hishtbuk Kraz in here. If he can send forward more units, I mean, there are Longfangs ready to be committed, Hunters are still firing away, the Ash Priests are still here, and there are Jack Scaraz chosen, so by all means, all is not lost. There goes my one survivor, my one banner carrier, who's running for the hills. It wasn't great for us over here by any means, but a 4v2, you have to expect that these sorts of things are ultimately going to happen. So at this point, my horsemen are out of ammunition, so I'm actually going to send them over to the other side, because I'm not going to be able to charge through here. There are stakes. This is also a primarily Finarfin front line, which means ultimately pikes are going to be forthcoming. So there's no sense in trying to pull my cavalry through over here. But this front line has also started to form. A combination of the range support from the crossbows and horse archers, but also liberal application of all of this heavy Angband infantry is ultimately going to lead to the crumbling of the first line. But the second line is ready, and the second line is ultimately scarier as well, with 2 units of bridge wards. And there's also the bodyguard units as well. Meanwhile, the line battle has begun over here. You can see that I do have my Eastron Marauders in position. I've also committed some of my Warband of Lothlin in here. So you can see I'm trying to specifically target down the bridge wards of Nargothrond. Thrond. Not the best shot, but some of my units are able to shoot, so it's better than nothing. And you can't expect convenience when you're on the attack in a siege such as this. Swordsman of Talathdin and fighting hard on the front line. Of course, with units of this quality in melee, we're obviously not going to win, but with throwing axes forthcoming again, it's all a matter of just trying to wear them down. Eventually, if the defenders reach sort of a critical low, as it were, when it comes to their manpower, we can just then swamp them, and that is really our best chance against units of this quality. The Valor Alcar are back there. You can see J-Monster's Iron Crown units have actually come across the bridges as well. There's still too much of the Tolling Gaurhoth units way back there for my liking. All of my units are across the bridge and sort of ready to be committed at some stage. Like, we have to take the slow approach here through the middle, but it's still better to have your units a little bit closer, in my opinion. Meanwhile, Scarahai Longfangs are pushed through. Obviously, this is a good sign. It means that we are sort of on the verge of breaking through. This is definitely the choke point where we are having the most luck. Whereas I wouldn't say luck, it's been very costly for us over here, but ultimately we are about to break through, as we are on the other side from J-Monster. It's going to be a much longer process. I think the Arqueni Findicano were over here, actually, what was left of them anyway. There was only like 1 or 2 of them, and I just swamped them. Yeah, here they are. There's only 5 of them, and they do immediately rout under the sheer weight of all of my Eastron horsemen as they charge forward. So this is what I was talking about. There's a little bit more room for me to use my Eastron horsemen over here. I can just help with the complete surround that Lord of Balagost has got. But even though we have ultimately been able to overrun this position, even still, a unit like the Sons of Hurin is not going to go down easily. So even though we have essentially beaten them here, Balagost is still taking tons of damage as he pushes through. Bladesman of Beredaithor moving in. I've got my horses coming in, but they're getting shot, but it's not a problem for me. The Eastron Horsemen are obviously really, really terrible when it comes to taking arrow fire, but far better that they take arrow fire than something like the Longfangs, which are a unit of infantry which may still come in handy. There's still the Ash Priest back there, there's still Wolfguard, there's still Chosen, so Balagost still certainly has a lot left to give in this particular fight. But with the Bladesman of Beredaithor still fighting hard on the front line, definitely not the easiest foe to bring down. The Sons of Hurin charging, and this is going to be really painful for the Scarahai Longfangs. That entire corner of their unit is going to be demolished as the Sons of Hurin hew them with their axes. It does give me a little bit of an opportunity to utilise my horsemen, but you can see they're getting shredded up by those archers. Again, better that they get shot than anything else over here really, but it's still not ideal as they do charge in. And you can see they do a decent amount of damage there to the Sons of Hurin, but a lot of them also end up dying to the mighty Sons of Hurin. Did they rout that unit? No, they didn't. They're just backing up, potentially to try and use their projectiles. Again, not ideal, but you can't expect the ideal in a situation like this. The defenders are going to be given a lot of natural advantages. You can see my Salamandrine Guard with the Arqueni Findicano dead. This is a good opportunity to try and go after some high quality units, so I decided to try and target the Arqueni and Morma Gilwa back here. The amount of kills I actually get on them is likely to be fairly limited, but they are unshielded. and I'm not going to do any damage whatsoever to a block like that. And everything else, like the Archers of Talath Daenin, a few straight arrows are killing off a few of them. The Salamanders could be useful late on as well, if a line breaks, because they can do a little bit more damage than the Eastron Horsemen can when it comes to charging in. Still, this line is clinging on for dear life. The Ironshod Halberdiers are in here, slowly pushing their way forwards. Meanwhile, Sartor Finderato moving backwards as the Salamanders' fire starts to give them second thoughts about being there. You can see now that I do have my Warns of Lothlin and some Clan Guard in there as well. So my Lothlin units are now on the front line, but at least my heavier Lothlin units. So much harder to kill than the Scarahai and the Warband that were in here previously. And also there's still the advantage of having these lower end Scarahai from Tol and Gaurhoth coming through here. So slowly but surely, things are actually going pretty decently on this front line for us. We're still losing in terms of the quality battle over here. And let's back up from that, lest it crashes. Marksman of Nargothrond shooting in. So we're going to take a lot of losses over here, of course, but we're yet to really commit our true heavy hitters over here. I've got another unit of axe throwers that I can commit forwards, which obviously can offer a little bit of support. There's also some Gijak Scarabs chosen. In particular, though, my Halberdiers will be very useful in this particular fight, and I've still got my Chieftains Honour Guard. The Valar Alcar are still running around. I think J-Monster was sort of deciding where to best use them, but it's not easy to use elephants, actually. And I think he's going to send them back over to his choke point primarily. And you can see over here we do finally... Well, we have finally mostly secured. I imagine, yeah, there's still a few Sons of Húrin over here who are a little bit scattered. You can see the devastation they wrought on my cavalry. Like, this one unit of Sons of Húrin has killed off about a quarter of my entire army. More or less, or at least they were involved in the deaths of a quarter of my entire army. And the defenders have 2 of them today. Scarahai Trappers firing in. I think they have the armor-piercing projectile as well, so the Sons of Húrin are ultimately being brought down now, but it's been costly for us over here, as you might expect, but it definitely wasn't without cost for the House of Fingolfin either. Remember, only 2 armies on the defence, and there are a lot, ultimately, on this side of the settlement, on the western side of Gondolin. A lot of elven bodies, as well as, of course, a mountain of Easterling and Orc bodies. Marksman of Beredaith getting into a good position to shoot. They are trying to go after the more lightly armoured Scarahai. Shooting the Guardians of the Iron Crown from the front isn't likely to yield a great deal of success, but I suppose they could. Meanwhile, over here, J-Monster getting underway. The catapult is ultimately out of ammunition at this point, but the catapult crew themselves are not going to be quite on the same level as the Wardens that are going to be fighting alongside them. The catapult will get in the way as well to a certain extent, so it's good that it's here, even though it is out of ammunition. Ironshod Legionnaires are also here. My Salamanders are out of ammunition, I think, at this point, but I do still have a bit of support I can send forward for J-Monster. The 3rd unit of my Eastron Marauders, who are not the most damaging, especially not against a sturdy force like Finarfin, but it's nice to have a bit of support. But I've also got my Sons of Ulfang, a nice unit of armour-piercing infantry, which should complement all of these Halberdiers quite nicely, but the Halberds, unfortunately, are going phalanx to phalanx with the bridge wards, which no unit in the game is going to come out of looking all that pretty. Also coming in from the side are the 2 bodyguard units of Finarfin, the Sartor Finderato and the Arqueni and Mormagilwa. Sentries of Hithlum are moving off, presumably. Actually, the Sauron has come in here, so Ralmak managed to get his Sauron in behind lines, so he managed to push through the middle over here. And you can see the Gijak Scarabs are on their way forward, so we continue to fight. Obviously, I've got a unit of out of ammunition Eastron Marauders in there acting as a meat shield. But we're actually doing okay on this front line. For now, they're still doing a good job, with Sauron, however, causing havoc in behind the lines. With the Gijak Scarabs on the way with the Lothlin units, we have a good mix of damage and of survivability. It's slow going over here. This is the grindiest fight. But it's going well. Or at least it's not going badly, which is all we can hope for at this point, I think. Meanwhile, Lord of Balagost and J-Monster's Iron Crown units are biding their time, waiting for the ideal moment to strike over here as well. As soon as the defenders are at their most stretched, that's when they need to act. The 2nd unit of Sons of Húrin are over here. I managed to push my Sons of Ulfang in behind the lines to go after these Herdsmen of Hithlum, who still had a bit of ammunition. And obviously this isn't going to go too well for the Herdsmen of Hithlum, because the Sons of Ulfang are very, very vicious in melee. However, I'm not really able to get my Eastron Marauders into a good position to fire. The catapult is actually getting in the way, otherwise I could get a good shot along the line, which would be nice. And now, perhaps more worryingly, my Sons of Ulfang are going to be introduced to a full charge from the Sons of Húrin, which getting a nasty charge from them is the last thing you want. But also, the difference in quality between the Sons of Húrin and the Sons of Ulfang is actually quite stark. They might actually look like they're on a similar tier, and indeed they do fill the same role, but the Sons of Húrin are much, much stronger than the Sons of Ulfang. Eastron Marauders are going to do their best to offer a little bit of support, and that will help matters a little bit, but ultimately the Axe Throwers are not armour piercing, so they won't be able to kill them in droves, but ultimately the Sons of Ulfang will lose, that much is pretty much certain, but hopefully with these Axe Throwers we can do a decent amount of damage there. J-Monster meanwhile has got a huge block of Iron Shots, but with all of his Iron Crown units on the other side, he is doomed to failure really over here against the Finarfin front line, because he doesn't have the survivability. I think the Bulldogs are still in here somewhere. Yes they are, you can see a few of the Severed Heads, but they're going to be blocked by the Sartor Finderato and the accompanying Nargothrond units. The Valar Aukar are moving in now. Not the easiest force to try and push through. A lot of spears, a lot of pikes, a lot of anti-elephant damage. But we are running low on time, and the Valar Aukar might need to be committed. You can see here the Sons of Ulfang doing their best. You can see the Sons of Húrin. They are taking losses to the Axe Throwers, so it's not all bad news, but what I was hoping to be a pretty nice flank by the Sons of Ulfang, which I could then transition into eating up the line, was blocked completely really by the Sons of Húrin. So not great news for us, but not a complete loss. But that has been the story of our battle so far. We've sort of taken losses, we've tried to make the best of it, but ultimately if we continue to take losses like this, we are ultimately going to come out second best in this fight. I've got my Halberdiers of Lothlin at this point on the front line, which will really help out actually, because the pikes at this point are a little bit scattered. There are sentries of Hithlum, there are bridge wards, but Sauron is still causing a bit of a real problem here for the defenders. Got to give credit to Ralmek for charging in and doing this much damage with Sauron. But ultimately the Arqueni are trying to hunt him down. He doesn't want to get bogged down by them because of the sheer amount of damage they can do. But very well played by Ralmek, I have to say. Haven't had the pleasure of playing with him before, but he's definitely got the hang of using Sauron, I would say. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the units on the front line now, there are a few Gijak Scarras, but really the thing that's holding our front line together is the Halberdiers of Lothlin. There is some more Scarahai coming in. Actually, no, that's Ash Priest. So the really high quality stuff actually is coming from Tol Gaurhoth. The mid-tier sort of core of this assault is my Easterlings, my Lothlin units. And there's also some more damage coming in from Ralmek. So normally the Easterlings would be the ones more focused around dealing damage, but here I'm acting more as the shield to Tol Gaurhoth's sword. Or perhaps mace would be more appropriate considering Sauron going absolutely crazy here in behind the lines. So this choke point is actually going the best for us so far, and we now have the assault coming in here. The javelins were initially eaten up by Tol Gaurhoth's force, but now Angband are on the front line. Their Iron Crown units are a little bit more serious than the Tol Gaurhoth units that Fingolfin have been dealing with over on this side of the battlefield up to now. There are still Scarahai on the front line as well. I think, yes, there are still some Gijak Scarras Wolfguard, so there's actually quite a lot of AP here, a lot of Maceman. You know, the right kind of AP for this situation as well, because they're heavy shielded units. They may lack for damage compared to heavy Axeman, but Macemen are bulkier and more survivable, which is actually going to be more important in this situation. Scarahai Trappers moving forward, some Gijak Scarras chosen, some Howlers, but they're scraping the barrel a little bit over here. Balagos did take the most damage early on. The Valar Aukar are in behind enemy lines at this point, so they did push through. They're going to try and get away from the Finarfin front line, which ultimately we are kind of doomed to failure over here at this point. You can see that my Eastron Marauders were committed to melee and immediately eaten alive, really, by the Nargothrond units and the Sons of Húrin, as you would expect. The Bulldogs are virtually dead. There goes Sauron, finally brought down by the Arqueni and the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. Unsurprising, he did very well for the time he was alive though. You can't really ask for more than that in a situation like this from Ralmek, I don't think. A solid front line here from Finarfin, however, has resulted in J-Monster's largely iron-shod force ultimately dying off. I have another unit of Eastron Marauders over here, which I actually couldn't get into position to fire on the front line, so I transitioned them over here, which they still have full ammo, this unit. It's the last unit of axe throwers I have, but with full ammo, while we are still ultimately going to lose over here, I can still make them bleed for their victory a little bit more, which, like I said, that's still the way we have to win this fight. There goes Angband's general in that blob. And we are in position, and this is the best shot I have ultimately. My units have been firing very slowly up to now. But now we can actually see the axe throwers firing at full tilt. This isn't going to do the most damage again because axe throwers are not AP and the Eastron Marauders are a relatively low damage example of axe throwers. But this is a nice blob to shoot into. It will ultimately still get some kills. And you're not going to get a better opportunity to really utilise axe throwers at this point. You can see though a lot of them are actually overshooting the mark. Again, low accuracy as well. Like, they are a cheap unit, so you can't expect them to win all on their lonesome. But we do have a good opportunity there to do a bit of extra damage. I've still got my salamanders over there as well, but with all the pikes it's going to be difficult. Sons of Húrin, they took damage to my Sons of Ulfang and my axe throwers, but they are ultimately still in good working order. The Airimo Arantar are also on the front line here, but they are going up against a lot of AP, which is not ideal for them, even if quality-wise they still beat the brakes off the Guardians of the Iron Crown. All of the Iron Crown units are very much here, and they are a tough cookie to wear down, and also the support of the Hishtbuk-Kraz Ash Priests, who have ultimately been skirmished down a little bit. But those fiery projectiles doing some good damage there into the heart of the enemy, which is needed. This is a bit of an all-or-nothing push over here on this side now. So we have lost on one choke point, but there is hope on the others. You can see actually over here, a lot of our units are exhausted, they are wavering. I've got my Chieftain's Honour Guard in here now, so the highest quality unit I have left, my General, is now being committed to the front line to try and give a hand to the Scarahai Trappers. Going up against the Arqueni Mormagilwa is not ideal, but at this point needs must. Wolfguard are coming in, so we still have a bit more to give over on this side, but with reinforcements heading across from the ultimately lost front line over here, that's the problem. That front line, I think, fell apart just a little bit too soon for us, because we were actually making inroads over here, but whether we can continue to do that with the reinforcements from Finarfin heading across to both choke points now remains to be seen. The Gijak Skaraz and the Iron Crown units fighting hard on the front line. Marksman of Beredaithal, are they going to charge into melee to try and stop the advance of the Guardians of the Iron Crown as J-Monster tries to envelop the Sons of Húrin, who are still fighting incredibly hard? Over here, meanwhile, I'm about to do the same thing as the Arqueni Findicano did earlier, but it was purposeful, because if I didn't run, I wouldn't have been able to get through this gap. So yes, my Salamanders took horrible losses going through there, in the same way as the Arqueni Findicano did, but I ultimately dodged the pikes, which means now I've got my cavalry in behind the lines. I managed to stop the pikes from getting into a comfortable position by throwing my Eastrons under the bus. So now it's more desperation, to be honest with you, because taking stock of the situation at this point, we're still behind in terms of kills by 10%. At this point in the battle, we really should be starting to claw it back if the siege is going to follow the usual thing of the attackers really pulling it off in the late game. We need to do something, and I'm going to try and play my part in that with my Salamanders, and this is a good opportunity to shoot. There's a lot of pikes over on the other front line. Over here, though, there is significantly less pikes, so we're going to charge in here, try and give the Gijak Skaraz and the Iron Crown units a bit of a helping hand. That's going to do quite a lot of damage to the Marines of Vinyamar that are fighting on the front line. But they're not going to allow me to have it all my own way, of course. The Herdsmen of Hithlum are going to shoot into my position. And ultimately I am still going to have to dodge the Bridgewards of Nargothrond as they try and hunt me down. I'm going to try and break off the units on the front line, try and shrug off this arrow fire. Because ultimately, if I can get the floodgates to break over here and we can sort of flood in with some Toll and Gaurhoth and some Angband units, we should be doing quite well over here. The Ash Priests are still here, the Iron Crown units are still here, Salamandrine Guard. At this point, I can't really ignore them any longer, so I'm going to draw sort of the one-handed Shotel weapons that the Salamanders have, and we are going to charge into the Herdsmen of Hithlum. Again, not ideal, because the Herdsmen of Hithlum as heavy axemen in melee against cavalry can definitely do their thing, and you can see the Salamanders have ultimately been dealt with rather well by the defenders, which has been really the story of my life in this game so far. I've got my units into a position that I ultimately wanted them in, but the defenders had the answers to everything I did, really. But the Salamanders weren't a complete loss over here. We ultimately did manage to disrupt their position enough for J-Monster and Balagos to do some good things over there. Meanwhile, over here, things continue to be a real grind in this choke point. My Chieftain's Honour Guard, it's a very even fight over here. My Halberdiers are still going strong. Support coming in from stuff like Hishtbuk-Kraz. I mean, Hishtbuk-Kraz hunters are really little more than a meat shield at this point. And a lot of them are actually breaking off. So you can see the fragility of a lot of Toll and Gaurhoth stuff relative to my Lothlin units. My Chieftain's Honour Guard fighting hard, my Halberdiers fighting hard. But ultimately all we can really do is hold these units in place. we're not really going to win this fight. With the presence of stuff like the Arqueni Morma Gilwa, the Sator Finderato I think are over here as well. It's not going to be good news for us. Meanwhile, you can see over here, my Eastron Marauders lasted for a surprisingly long time in this fight, to be honest, which I guess is testament to how slowly pikes generally deal damage. But ultimately, of course, they ended up getting almost nothing done, of course, but they were just a distraction for my Salamanders to try and get in behind enemy lines, which they did ultimately, but I think they are all dead at this stage. I was trying to get them in, trying to help deal some damage to the front line. Ultimately, however, I don't think it's going to be enough. The Sator Finderato have made their way over here, in fact. So another bodyguard tier unit, Herdsmen of Hithlum charging onto the front line, the Irimo Arantar, what's left of the Sons of Hurin, who are still going, well, there's only 9 of them, but still, that's still a problem over here. And ultimately, for a little while there, for a brief moment, it looked as though we were going to be able to overwhelm the position over here. And Balagost and J-Monster could have been the saviours for myself and Ralmec over at the front gate over there, but it's not going to be at this point. Like, they just have too much strength over here, and Balagost and J-Monster's assault is going to fall apart. And indeed, Lord of Balagost's Gaurhoth army is now fleeing, I think. No, it's actually J-Monster's army that's fleeing. There's still some Gijak Scaraz fighting on the front line, but of course this means that all of these units, as well as the bridge wards over on the other side, are going to be able to head to the front line over here, which actually we were slowly winning this front line over here, I can say. Between my Halberdiers and Chieftains units, and there were still Gaurhoth units in there, there were still some Gijak Scaraz that were fighting hard. We had enough AP and enough quality that we were actually winning over here, but it was a very slow victory, and of course now there are going to be reinforcements on the way across. Bridge wards, all the things that are necessary to bring our brave assault to an end. But it was a rough fight, to be honest, for us as the attackers. For me especially, there were just several things, like the defenders really judged everything I did that was meant to be decisive, like sending across a flanking force over here to try and crack this defence quickly. They responded to it immediately and did it brilliantly. My cavalry got in behind the lines, they immediately responded to it. My axe throwers, they got into a position. My Sons of Ulfang got around the flank. They immediately responded to it. So everything I did, they countered excellently. A lot of that has to do, of course, with the quality of units they had at their disposal, because it was a 2v4, but you still have to give them credit for that. The Gaurhoth armies as well, a lot of their more lightly armoured units really suffered at the hands of the skirmishers in much the same way I did for a brief period of the fight. And J-Monster as well. His Iron Shod units did their best over here, but this fight was ultimately the one we lost first because he just didn't have enough quality over here. His Valor Alcar sort of bulldozed through and then went over to other choke points. His Bulldogs were over here, but other than that, it was just basic Iron Shods. Yeah, and we ultimately ended up losing that fight as a result. His Halberdiers did their best, but when you're faced with the bridge wards, you really need to find a way of not tackling them head-on, phalanx to phalanx, because they are the very best in the game at taking that kind of fight. And just in general, Finarfin and Fingolfin, arguably the two strongest factions in the game at the moment. They mesh excellently, and I think you saw that in full flow today. If I had to rank the top 3, interesting choice of words there. These units over here are depleted, but they are ultimately going to be able to get out of that. I think actually Captain Gervais, he crashed at this point, but not that it really matters because most of his units were committed anyway. And indeed, like he's got his archers shooting in there regardless. So it's not really going to make a great deal of difference because he had most of his stuff committed anyway. And the battle was long decided before this point, really. But yeah, like I was saying, I think Angband are the other faction that I would put in the top 3 at this point, if I were to judge it. I don't have as much experience with the game as others do, but those were the 3 that I would say stand out. But Fingolfin and Finarfin on the defence like this, they complement one another so well. Finarfin are like an unmoving wall if you position your units right, which we saw today. The armour-piercing spears of the Wardens of Nargothrond and the pikes of the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are something that's extremely difficult to try and break down. And when you combine that with the sword expertise of the House of Fingolfin, with the additional spice that units like the Sons of Hurin and the Herdsmen of Hithlum offer you, and of course having a pike unit of their own, very, very tough. And they ultimately ended up showcasing their strength today. But you can see as well, actually, a good example of the tankiness of some of the Easterling units, to be honest with you, because we're still fighting hard. The Jack Scarabs are all broken, really, as are the Hishbuk-Raz. At this point, really, it's just my units that are left fighting. I mean, the Halberdiers do end up breaking them. They've been fighting for a long time, doing some really, really good work. And ultimately, it wasn't really my flanking attempts and my attempts to sort of break the lines that ended up going well for me in this fight. It was just my bog standard engage and slowly wear the enemy down in a grindy fight. That was what ultimately ended up working better for me with my Lothlin units, which is interesting. Scared geese indeed. That was Balagost's general. My general is still alive, actually, and he is over here somewhere. Yep, there he is. Mightiest Khan, with what very little remains of his chieftain's honour guard. An incredibly tanky unit, actually, as they have demonstrated. Fighting hard on the front line here for an extended period of time. But it's not going to be enough to claim victory here, but it was a close battle ultimately. It is going to be within 10%. And a very enjoyable one to be a part of it was as well, especially part of a glorious new settlement such as this. This is a rather interesting use of the architecture. But yeah, they're still broken and fighting to the death Hishbuk-Raz hunters. Same with the Halberdiers as well, as they are slowly poked to death. This is how Finarfin does its business. When they back you into a corner like this, it's nigh impossible to defeat them, really. Arqueni Mormagilwa, who are depleted after their heroics on the front line, helping to bring down Sauron. They were really the bodyguard unit over here as well, for a while. We had to deal with a lot of pikes and spears, but only one bodyguard unit on the front, which is why we were doing quite well for a while, but the Mormagilwa was still enough, ultimately. And that brings us to the final stand of my general and his boys, who are lasting quite a long time against the AP of the Wardens of Nargothrond. With his serrated sabre there, parrying blows with only his arm. Always like the Easterling style. There's always been something about it that's quite appealing. 278,000 frames in. There's still actually 1,000 frames remaining, which is somewhat impressive. Having a look around. Bridge wards of Nargothrond. Definitely one of the real issues in this fight. I would say that they typify what Finarfin did. The Bridge wards and Wardens of Nargothrond for Finarfin, and certainly the Sons of Húrin for Fingolfin. They were absolutely monstrous in this fight. You saw what they did to me on 2 separate engagements, and they really showed why they are a unit to be genuinely feared in this game. Definitely above and beyond what I could provide in terms of challenge with the Sons of Ulfang. As much as I like the look of the Sons of Ulfang, they are merely a high tier unit, not an uber tier unit. My general, meanwhile, surrounded. Now that the Mormagilwa are in there, there he goes. And that is going to be that. I think there are a few units which are just broken and fighting to the death in the corner of the map somewhere. I think some of my Eastron Marauders, like 1 or 2 of them, actually got caught under the bridge and they're probably still over there, but I end up admitting defeat anyway. Just a little bit of time to actually take a quick look around the map as well. Once again, there's also this pond over here, which I really like, this little feature. We didn't actually get to see it too much during the map. You can see the elven statues and this little forum, as it were. The fields we did get to see briefly all around the outside of the map. There's a sort of more wilderness-focused field area out over here. And we never got to see the final stand either, but it was just a sort of straight choke point anyway. But the defenders handled themselves very well and were fully deserving of the victory today. You can see as a result of really my 3 really ultimately failed attempts to be decisive. I think probably the Salamandrine Guard were a partial success at least, because I did do some damage to that front line, and for a brief moment it looked like J-Monster and Belagos were going to break through, but the Irimo Arantar and the Sartor Finderato were ultimately too much to break down. But the Salamandrine Guard kind of worked, but trying to push through with the Sons of Ulfang and the Eastron Marauders ultimately ended up failing because of the Sons of Húrin. Much the same with my Ravagers of Heimring, who ended up getting absolutely butchered by the Archers and the Bladesmen of Bered Ithel, and of course the Sons of Húrin. As for everyone else, J-Monster, he suffered in a similar way to me, albeit in more of a straight-up sense. His Iron Shots just weren't able to impact on the Finarfin front line in the way that he wanted. He did better, I would say, on the other side with his Iron Crown units in conjunction with Belagos, but ultimately Belagos' army just didn't have enough left in it to continue the assault. He did get the most kills out of all of us, narrowly, which does go to show that that initial engagement actually went okay for him. But ultimately he just ended up getting too many losses and ran out of steam in the face of the bodyguards. And Ralmek, he did more damage on the front line. Again, most of my Lothlin units were there acting as more of a tanky presence. Meanwhile, he had stuff like Sauron, Scarahai Blood Drinkers, and some Ash Priests, which I think he had to just commit straight to melee because he couldn't get them to throw their projectiles. But ultimately he was the main damage dealer on the front line, whereas I was the shield, so to speak. But yeah, we did okay as the attackers. There were a few things that I would have done differently, like I would have sent a smaller flanking force over here, which ultimately would have been killed off even more easily, but you know, I don't think having a single unit of Ravagers of Heimerring would have made the difference in the end, but it would have at least helped, just to have a unit of Falksmen on hand. We'll never know now, of course. I think if J-Monster could turn things around, or change things about this battle, he probably would commit maybe a couple of his Iron Crown units over to the other side to try and shore things up a little bit more. Maybe he would have saved his Uraloki for later as well, because they did do some damage, but ultimately it wasn't the all-singing, all-dancing performance we usually see from them in choke-pointy engagements like that. And I actually think the Tol and Gaurhoth players couldn't really have played it much differently. I think Ralmek's use of Sauron was excellent. I think Belagos did the best with what he could, so it is what it is. I think ultimately the defenders, you can tell from their kill counts, they did a good job, and that really is the long and the short of it. Having a look at what did the damage for me, you can see that by far my most impressive units, really, the Chieftain's Honour Guard did okay, but the only units to break 100 were my 2 units of Halberdiers of Lothlin on that front line. So like I said, really it was a case of just my Lothlin units being that shield. But you can even see there, like my Clan Guard of Lothlin, one of my units of Clan Guard was on that front line, and they didn't get a lot of kills at all. You can see how brutally they were dealt with by the Sons of Húrin as well. Same story with my Ravagers of Heimerring. Look, like one of them only got a single kill. That's crazy. They were outmatched so much, I can't help but feel as though they probably should maybe deal a little bit more damage, or maybe, as much as I like the Sons of Húrin, the fact that they're able to do that to that extent is maybe a sign that things have gone a little bit too far with their stats, and maybe their base damage should be reduced a little bit to sort of put more emphasis on the armor-piercing nature of the unit. I don't know. That was a unit an engagement I should say, that I should definitely have lost, but 1 kill? I'm not so sure. Warband of Lothlin, they were just there as a stopgap anyway. The Wardens of Lothlin actually did okay. My Spears there on the front line, and my Salamanders did okay as well. 72 kills, the vast majority of which were the few charges I was able to get off in behind the lines. So not the worst, but again, you can tell this was always going to be the sort of kill counts we could expect in a 4v2 as the attackers. We were always going to get manhandled in terms of some of these frontline engagements. The great hope for us would have been that ultimately the defenders just ran out of steam, but that was a futile hope when thinking about Finarfin and Fingolfin, who were definitely good value for their win today. And Gondolin rises. It manages to withstand the onslaught today. Again, this is probably a map that we will see in the future as well when Gondolin are added. I believe the next faction are going to be the Haladin, which are the Northmen. And then following on from that, I think Gondolin would be the next faction to be added. So hopefully in the future we will see the return of Gondolin, with Gondolin themselves defending their city. But yeah, definitely a thoroughly enjoyable game to be a part of. Big thank you to everyone for being a part of this battle replay. A special thank you as well to Captain Gervais, who was the creator of the map. And thank you also to J-Monster for allowing me to show this, obviously. When things are still in development, you have to get permission to show things, so you don't want to misrepresent anything by any means. But yeah, this map is already very, very good, so there's nothing really too much to be worried about. I think the only thing that needs to be changed for the next build, which won't be for a little while yet, but I think if you have 5 attackers, you end up with one of the attackers having a slightly weird deployment zone. But that's a minor fix, of course, but I think that's the only thing to be changed. So yeah, that was Gondolin, the first time that I've shown it really on my channel, because I think WK was in the conceptual stages of making a Gondolin map before he ultimately ended up dropping it. There was a Gondolin map previously as well, but it wasn't anywhere near as impressive as what Captain Gervais has made for Silmarillion. So yeah, excellent. As for what's next, I mean, to be honest, this is going to be pushed ahead in the schedule. I'm not entirely sure where it will sit, but there's a few replays that have already been recorded that will come after this, and of course there will be the continuation of the 2 streams a week for as long as I'm able to make that possible. I'm also thinking about Patreon, to be honest. I mean, it's one of those things that a lot of people have said that I should do, and it's the sort of thing that I have morally, I think I have sort of puzzled my way through to saying that it is okay, as long as, because I don't intend to stop the channel, so that means that at any point, so that means that it's not as if I'm just taking a bit of money and then I'm going to stop the channel forever and just leave. So morally, I think it's acceptable to do so, but again, it's the sort of thing that I think I'll talk about a little bit more on the stream, but it is the sort of thing that might pop up at some stage. Again, don't give too much. Like, it's only meant to be sort of the same sort of thing as like a tip you give to a waiter, if that really. It's just the sort of optional thing, and I don't have any features on my channel that sort of a Patreon user would get any additional benefit from. It would just be like, again, like donations really. So yeah, it's the sort of thing that I have considered, but that's the sort of thing that maybe I can address in a more live stream based format, because I can get sort of opinions on that more so than anything else, better than just shoving it at the end of a video here. As for what's coming in the further future, obviously I do intend to do a little bit more Silmarillion. I think there is going to be a Silmarillion tournament, which I might be a part of, although I think it would be better if J-Monster covered that more so than myself. But there is a Silmarillion RP that you can feel free to join. It's open. I think all of the faction leaders have already been occupied, but if you want to get involved, you can sort of pick your faction, and then your leader will assign you your army. The tournament, like I just mentioned, I think will be happening at some point in early October. So keep a lookout for that. I'm sure J-Monster will be streaming it at the time. My 2 weekly streams will continue with the Lothlorien campaign, which probably will be coming to the end, to be honest with you, because the goal I have in mind is to sort of take Orthanc and then leave it there. And replays will continue to flow. I still have unrecorded at this point, which means they probably won't be seen on YouTube for at least 2 or 3 weeks. I still have a Siege of Dale. I have a 3v3 that was given to me by Sin of the Dark Cloud on Reforged. I have a Tolfalas siege as well, so there's a few old friends that we can expect to see in the further future towards mid to late October, I think, because it's been long enough since we've seen those maps, I think, that we can see them again. But of course, I'm always on the lookout for more replays, especially on maps that are seldom seen. Obviously, it doesn't have to be quite so grandiose as Gondolin. It could just be any of the interesting field maps we don't get to see an awful lot of from either Reforged or Silmarillion. So yeah, that's pretty much that. I have been thinking about branching out into Rise of Mordor as well, but we'll see on that, because it's the sort of thing where replays might be harder to come by, and I'm not a massive fan of Attila's combat system, but we'll see. It's the sort of thing that I should puzzle through on my own rather than subject you to it here at the end of the video. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed getting a good look at an iconic city like Gondolin, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.